They came rushing down in great force, holding up flaming torches, hatchets, crowbars, and staves. I was about to dash out with my prize, but in the confusion that ensued, I lost sight of the door. I had never seen humans in such a frenzy of shouting. I never knew that human beings could be so devilish. They were all armed, aimed spears at me, and hit me with arrows while I was desperately trying to find a way out.
More than their weapons, the sight of their flaming torches, red-colored and smoking viciously, was completely unnerving. I dropped the lamp, my only ambition now being to escape with my skin intact. I had never been so close to fire. Sometimes in summer, we noticed forest fires far off, but they would not be frightening, and we kept our distance from them. But now the fire was choking, blinding and scorching. One fellow flung his torch at me, which singed my skin. Another threw a spear which gashed my side. I ran round and round madly. I could not fall upon my pursuers as I could not see them clearly.
The crowd was intent on murdering me. They were heaving huge rocks at me. Men in their frenzy seemed to have lost all fear, and boys of all ages were cursing and chasing me round and round. I could have fallen on any of them and scattered them but for the fire in their hands. It was unbearable. I was bleeding from the cuts on my face and limbs, and I wished I were dead.
I would have welcomed death in preference to the torture I was facing now. Penned in the stockade, I felt hopeless and exhausted.
The monsters chased and tormented me. Luckily for me, a mishap occurred at this desperate moment. A boy who was capering with a torch at the end of a bamboo pole, while attempting to poke me, held his flame too close to the fence, which caught fire.
Their attention was now diverted to saving the sheep. They demolished the stockade and opened a way out. Wedged between bleating sheep, which received the blows meant for me, I ran out and escaped into the night. Looking back, I feel that I should not have chosen the easy path of raiding villages. Stepping into human society was a thoughtless act.
Instead of living the rest of my life majestically as an honest-to-God tiger, going in and out of his cave, eating and sleeping, performing no act except what he wished, lord of the jungle, before whom other creatures from a squirrel to a bear quaked in fear, I had let myself in for ultimate slavery. I had thought that there could never be any creature stronger than a tiger. I was mistaken. A human being may look small, without prominent teeth or claws, but he is endowed with some strange power, which can maneuver a tiger or an elephant as if they were toys.
After my attack on the village, people there not only began to guard their cattle better, but also approached the authorities for help. They sent their spokesman to the town to meet the collector and demand his help.
They were vociferous and gave sensational and exaggerated reports of how a tiger was terrorizing the countryside, invading the villages and carrying away cattle, and mauling and maiming people going into the forests to gather firewood. They gave a list of names of persons who were killed. They were building a case against me and were inventing stories. I had always tried to avoid encounters with human beings, and if I had wanted, could have mangled and messed up the human creatures that had entered the stockade that night in the village.
But I didn't want to. If I had been present at that meeting with the collector, I would have proved that the villagers were lying. But I came to know of it only later in my life. The collector, being a man used to such representations, just said, "I'll look into your case."
I can't promise anything. How do you know that there is a tiger around? We saw it.
How many of you saw it? All of us, said the deputation. How many persons live in your village?
They looked at each other in consternation, being unfamiliar with numbers. More than 100, sir, ventured an elder. Have all the 100 seen the tiger? Asked the collector. Yes, they chorused.
The collector fixed his gaze on someone arbitrarily and asked, "How big was the tiger?" The man blinked for a minute and then indicated with his hands some size, whereupon another man pushed himself forward and said, "He is wrong. The tiger was this big." A heated argument started, many others joined for and against, until the collector said, "Silence, are you both talking of the same tiger or two different ones? Was there one tiger or two or three?"
Someone said, 5 in all, sir. 4 cubs and a tigress, which were shot. Who shot them? Asked the collector.
Some shikari from the town. Which town? We can't say, sir, we don't know.
Did they have a license to shoot? Who gave them license? The petitioners, feeling they were being dragged beyond their depths, became tongue-tied.
The collector observed them for a moment and said, "Have you brought your petition in writing?" They looked terrified, having no notion of the world of letters. The collector felt compassionate and said, "I can't take action unless there is a written petition. Go to a petition writer.
You'll find one in the veranda of the law court or at the market gate. Get the petition engrossed on a stamp paper of 1 rupee and 50 paise, and leave it with my clerk at the office. Then I'll fix a date for inspection and take action."
For all I know, there may be no tiger whatever. You may be imagining. One mentions 1 tiger and another says 5. And he permitted himself a dignified grin at the joke. However, it is my duty to look into it, if you have a grievance.
The deputation of villagers had to visit the collector almost once a week, spending time and money to no purpose. From within the jungle where their villages were situated, they had to trudge 10 miles to the highway and wait endlessly for a chance lift in a passing bus or lorry.
At the collector's office they could see, after much waiting, only the collector's clerk, who took their petitions and then directed them to satisfy further official formalities. At the end of the day they returned to their villages, dreading lest the tiger should waylay them.
I had perfected my system of snatching cattle at night. I became quite familiar with their movements and timings and the weak points in the enclosures that the creatures were penned in. The villages were all alike and the villagers had similar habits in tending their sheep or cattle.
They could never anticipate where I'd strike next. I covered a large perimeter. If I took a sheep from this village today, my next target would be elsewhere, in your terms, several days later. In between, they'd not know where to look for me.
Some parts of Mempi Hills had deep ravines, quite inaccessible to human beings. I hid myself in them and planned to attack with considerable calculation, taking care not to be seen in the same area again. I had perfected the art, no village was too far out, and no fencing was impregnable.
I walked in and out of places, hardly aware at that time how very desperate the villagers were beginning to feel. They began to adopt defensive measures, such as keeping up a bonfire all night, and posting vigilant guards, armed with sharp weapons, and in 1 or 2 places they had even scattered poisoned meat for me. But I'd not touched such things, only some wildcat or mongrel nosing around ended its career then and there.
When he announced his name as captain, they always asked, "Of what?" He would always reply, "Just captain. Mr. Captain, if you like."
Oh, we thought it was an army or football captain. He was used to such quips wherever he went, but he could not afford to mind it and treated it good-humouredly. A man about town, he had to be seeing people constantly on business, running his circus, which had its origin in a certain, Grand Irish Circus.
When questioned on the Irish origin or contents of his circus, he generally explained, "When I was down and out at Pune, I met a chap, a down-and-out Irishman, who owned a half-starved pony, a yellow monkey, and a parrot which could pick up numbers and alphabets from a stack of cards. He took them about and displayed them here and there in the city. He dispensed with his pony, selling it off to a Tonga owner, and managed with the parrot and the monkey, which became his sole assets. He could maintain them inexpensively with a handful of nuts for the monkey and a guava fruit for the parrot."
He had a portable signboard painted, Grand IRISHCIRCUS, and set it up in the town hall compound, street pavements, or market square and attracted a crowd. He called himself O'Brien, though he had a brown skin and never uttered a word of English or Irish but spoke only the native language, in order to establish rapport with his public, as he always took the trouble to explain. Captain always wondered what sort of an Irishman he was, but said to himself, "If I could call myself Captain, by the same logic he could be O'Brien."
At some point in their association, O'Brien took up some other business and sold his goodwill and the circus to Captain for 50 rupees. Captain used the signboard, monkey, and parrot to make a living following O'Brien's tradition. Feeling that he should do better, he approached one Dadaji, owner of Dadaji Grand Circus.
The grand old man was reclining in an easy chair in his special tent. Young Captain approached him with all humility with the monkey on his shoulder and holding the parrot cage in his hand.
Dadaji watched the visitor for some time and asked, "What do you want?" "I want to work here, sir." "What do you know of animals?" Captain was afraid to give an answer.
After waiting for a moment, the man thundered, "Have you no answer? Be frank. I would appreciate it." I like people young or old, to be frank.
Captain felt like turning round and fleeing. But he was standing too close to the great man to run away. His aides, standing at different points, were watching him with contempt. The only animal Captain had known was an alley cat and its mates in his boyhood in Abu Lane.
And a mongrel he was fond of, which used to curl up in the street dust. The several attempts he made to shelter it in his room were frustrated by his father, who was strictly anti-canine. Even after his death, Captain could not realize his ambition, since their creditors took over their property, which resulted in the scattering of the family. Captain, with his little savings in hand, set out to seek his fortune and ended up in Pune.
These flashes of memory were not worth recounting, and he helplessly wished that his retreat were not blocked by all those terrible aides in grey uniform with their pockets embroidered in yellow thread, Dadhaji Grand Circus. Frightening. The old man was evidently enjoying the young fellow's discomfiture.
Captain felt suddenly challenged and said, "Born and bred in Abu Lane of Malgudi town, sir, no chance, sir, of encountering animals, sir. The very reason why I have come to you, sir, is to learn about animals and their training." He had found his tongue, which pleased the old gentleman.
"Ah, that's better. You should talk, otherwise you will be left out. A young chap who comes out to learn and earn must be alert. I know where we stand now. I seem to know the monkey on your shoulder and the parrot. They were once with the worthless fellow who called himself O'Connor or some such thing. Don't know where he got the idea that he was Irish, a bastard possibly out of our own slums.
I am not going to waste my time asking how and where you met him and all that. It's your business. Keep that monkey, if you like, or drive it back to its treetop, so also the parrot. If you hoped that you could add them to my show, you were mistaken.
They are too insignificant for my circus. When I say show, I mean acts of large quadrupeds and bipeds, whose movements would be visible from any part of the auditorium. Otherwise it is no show.
What you carry is fit for street corners. I have no use for them. Now you may go if you choose, or stay if you are willing to work here. Captain was fascinated by the old man's alternating moods of aggression and tenderness. Let me stay here, sir, he said, and learn to work. The old man said, one have around 150 animals in this camp.
Are you prepared to start with the horses? You will have to clean their stables first and also groom them. And then I'll tell you what you can do. Ultimately, if you prove your worth, you will be in charge of the cages of tigers and lions.
That is all for the present. You will be fed and sheltered and given pocket money. Think over this offer and give me your answer tomorrow. Captain said, not tomorrow, sir.
I'll stay here. When I say tomorrow, I mean it. Take 24 hours to think it over. That was how Captain started his career when he was hardly 20. Dadhaji imparted to him unreservedly all his knowledge and skill in the training of animals as well as his business methods.
Dadhaji often explained his philosophy. There is no such thing as a wild animal. Any creature on 4 legs can be educated if you apply the right method. For over 50 years I have lived with animals, over 100 at a time, and I know what I am saying. Dadhaji began to depend on Captain more and more. When he became too old to manage things, he made him his working partner.
At his death, the entire circus with all its property and assets and animals were bequeathed to Captain. The transition was unnoticed since Captain had virtually been running the show for years, only presenting periodical reports to Dadhaji while he rested in his tent. After Dadhaji's death, Captain shifted his circus to Malgudi.
It was a mighty undertaking. He sold the ground at Pune, taking permission from the purchaser of the land to keep his animals there till he was able to move his business to Malgudi. He had enough money to negotiate for the wasteland beyond the level crossing.
Within 3 months the land was transformed and in big letters loomed the sign Grand Malgudi Circus. He had originally intended to name it after the Irishman or Dadhaji, but the municipal chairman and members showed some reluctance in their attitude until he assured them that he was putting Malgudi on the world map by naming it Grand Malgudi Circus. Just to show my roots are here, although I must confess that I had thought of perpetuating my benefactors' names originally.
Hereafter Malgudi will be the home for hundreds of animals and scores of acrobats and performers of all kinds. You will be proud of it. His talk was captivating. He liberally dispensed money to smooth out the passage of all kinds of transactions and favors, and in a short while Malgudi became more famous for its circus than for its mountains and river, and Captain was viewed as the wonder man who had transformed the town.
It was the result of hard work. Captain rose at 5 in the morning and went on a tour of inspection. Elephants and camels and giraffes were at the eastern end of the camp.
He went up there first with his chief executive Anand, who had been with him since his Pune days. He started with the camels at one end, keeping in mind Dadaji's injunction, you must watch the condition of every animal and anticipate how long it will last, and get an immediate replacement if one dies. Keep an eye on the sources, if you are not to face embarrassment in public.
The show never halts because of one animal. He could judge their health and welfare by observing their stance and attitude at 5 in the morning. Animals, in his view, looked their brightest at that hour if they were in good health. The animal stirred and gave some indication of recognizing his presence when he approached, and that pleased him.
He passed on from animal to animal, checking their welfare. If they were sick, he sent Anand to wake up the veterinarian immediately. Starting with camels, he passed on to elephants, horses and lastly to the minor performing creatures, and by the time he reached his office he would have understood the condition of every creature under his control. He sat at his desk and noted down his observations and suggestions or criticized the state of cleanliness of cages or surroundings and indicated punishments for erring assistants.
When he finished his job at the table, his wife would ring the bell for breakfast. All our animals from the performing mongoose to the tusker are in excellent condition, he boasted at breakfast. Yes, said his wife, they are tended better than your family. You must say something unpleasant, otherwise you are never happy. Your beloved animals may also have something to say if they could speak. What really is your grouse? I never understand.
You demanded that the boys should be sent to Lovedale School, that I have done, swallowing my own ideas at such a cost. Good thing too, otherwise you would have made lion tamers of them as well. I don't know why you say such things. Knowing full well where the money comes from, so much needed for you and your damn family at Madras, all hangers-on, none of them will do anything except sit back and wait for my check every month. If you wish to see them get on, why don't you ask one of your brothers to come and type my correspondence at least? Isn't enough that I slave for you? You want the entire, damned, family at your beck and call? I am tired of everything, my boy.
As soon as you get someone to lead your trapeze team, I'll retire and go back to Madras. I'm tired of jumping and swinging and the perpetual tent living. When she became too trying, Captain would abruptly leave the table. When she saw him rise, she felt uneasy and said as if nothing had happened, your coffee.
Want more milk, sugar? He never answered, but just emptied the cup at one gulp and walked out of the tent. She kept looking after him and muttered, he has lost all sense of humor, the slightest upset and he flounces out, let him. I don't care.
Only animals seem to be fit for his company. He told himself, women are impossible. Worse than 20 untamed jungle creatures on one's hands at a time. Captain had gone to the collector's office to renew some petty license. He pricked up his ears when he heard the word, tiger.
He was about to leave but halted his steps, remembering another of Dadaji's injunctions. If you hear the word, tiger, don't leave. Stay back and find out. And he was hearing the word, tiger, not once but several times through the babble of 4 villagers.
This is our 20th visit and you always keep saying, come tomorrow. Are you playing with us? You are waiting to see us and our cattle eaten by the tiger and digested before you can think of saving us. Every time we have to walk from our homes 10 miles for a bus to reach here, said another. The clerk was irritated and said, no one has invited you. Then why did the officer promise help? Ask him.
Why should I answer that question? Yes, if we see him. As it is, we meet only the pujari, not the god in the sanctum, and the pujari denies what the god promises. And they laughed at their own quip. This is not his only business, he has more important work than listening to your stories. Ah, stories, you think? Come and spend a night in our village and you will know. My boss will inspect your village. When? After the tiger has had his fill?
There is no tiger and he will not eat you, said the clerk. The officer will come on inspection next month. Next month. Next month. You have been saying it for months while the tiger is fattening himself on our cattle. You get out of my office. Have you no eyes to see that I am busy now? He beat his brow in despair. This is a cursed seat.
No peace. I'm not allowed to clear these papers. Tomorrow when the boss comes, he will bawl his head off. He lost his temper suddenly.
What do you take me for? Government office is not your nuptial chamber, for you to demand things. I'll call the police if you are going to be riotous. Mind your manners.
The officer will come on inspection to your village and then take necessary steps. Till then you must wait. Captain watched them as they left the place grumbling, but afraid to curse openly. The clerk got absorbed in his files once again, muttering, "The officer is always on tour. What can I do if everyone comes and bothers me? Am I the officer drawing a fat salary?" This was addressed to the captain, who was at the door, and he just said, soothingly,
Of course, you are not, and followed the villagers out. He followed them a little distance, and threw out a general question in order to attract their attention. Are you the headman of the village? At which they turned round and stopped. How did you know us, sir? He introduced himself.
You see that circus there? That's mine, and I often come to this office on business. Not bad fellows at this office, but they delay. That poor fellow, he can't help it.
Only his master has to do things. Every time we come, we bring him some offering, cucumbers or sugar cane, pumpkin, melon, or anything. Never see him bare-handed, and yet he is unhelpful. Captain made himself agreeable by listening to them patiently. All that they seemed to want was a hearing.
They did not know who he was, but his dress, trousers, bush shirt and the sun hat impressed them, and he spoke to them in Tamil, which endeared him to them. He treated them to colored drinks from a wayside stall, while eliciting information about the tiger. He invited them to come up and see his circus.
I have work to do, next 2 days, and then I'll come to your village. If you help me, I'll catch the tiger. You will have to show me where he lives. We don't know, sir.
We can't say. He is here, there and everywhere. We think he is a devil and has wings and not an ordinary creature.
We saw him only once. We would have burnt him with the torches and cooked him alive, but he escaped. He slips in and out, and can never be caught or killed.
He is no ordinary creature. Before we can notice, he snatches away even the biggest buffalo, and vanishes. He is an ordinary tiger, black and yellow, with 4 legs and only 1 tail, and no extraordinary creature. I'll deal with him, don't worry.
I'll see you on Thursday next. He took directions from them to reach the village, and was with them on the appointed day. The village was set far into the jungle, a single street and about 30 homes of bricks or just thatched huts, and a lot of cattle and sheep, mostly a pastoral community. He had gone in a small car, but he had to leave it on the main highway and walk down to the village, which was full of excitement.
Women and children stood around him. Most of the men were out working in the fields. Seeing Captain's grey uniform, the boys cried, "The police have come," and ran around to fetch the men, who recognized him and cried, "Oh, it's our hunter, who is going to kill the tiger." Captain corrected them.
I'm not going to kill, but take him away. Some rushed into their homes and brought out ancient stools and benches and offered him seats. Some brought him tender coconut and chipped off the top and offered him a drink. Others brought him papaya and banana.
Captain felt overwhelmed by their hospitality and promised, "I will see that you are not bothered by the tiger. But you must all help me. I must know where he is and how he comes and goes and where he keeps himself during the day." "Oh, that's difficult, sir.
If we follow him, he may turn round and attack. If you don't tell me where the tiger is, how can I catch him? I may also begin to think, like those officials, that you are all fancying the tiger." At this they protested. Even 2 days ago, 2 fellows who were out to cut wood were mutilated. 1 fellow lost an arm. Will you take me to him? Not in our village, but there on the other side of the hillock. Will you come with me and show me the man and where he was attacked? So that I may find out the tiger's movements? Strangely, they seem to be averse to this procedure.
The victims of the tiger seemed as elusive as the tiger itself. They would complain and pour forth their grievances, but somehow at the same time show reluctance to help him directly. They would not be explicit about the attacks.
But Captain would not give up. He changed his tactics. He contacted the forest guards, offered a fee for information about the tiger, followed their tips. Leaving much of his circus work to his chief executive, he unrelentingly pursued the tiger, and finally arrived at the rivulet beyond which was the cave at the tail end of the Mempi range.
Captain had taken special precautions to camouflage himself with certain types of foliage. He hoisted himself onto the branch of a tree and stayed there all night in the company of the forest guards, and finally had a glimpse of the tiger returning to his cave. Although I was cautious and avoided all the traps laid for me, ultimately I yielded to a temptation, and that proved to be the end.
After trying many hideouts, I had come back to my original home. As I emerged from my lair late one evening, passing through the long grass, I heard a bleating and, following the sound, saw a well-fed goat in front of me. I hesitated only for a moment, looked about, took a leap and landed on its back.
At the same time I heard a strange, unfamiliar clattering noise. An iron door came down and shut me in. I was trapped. I was at once surrounded by unfamiliar figures and heard strange voices.
A flashlight was pointed at me and a man was saying, just what I was looking for. A magnificent fellow. Mr. Captain, isn't he rather big for our purpose? No, he is just right. Only we may have to starve him for a while. Will you be able to make him obedient? Of course, said the other.
You will see, I'll make him a star. It seems to me he is too heavy for our purpose. He is all right. He'll become slim and agile. Leave it to me. Then he turned round and said to someone, pay off all the men who have helped us in trapping.
Give them an extra tip, but make sure that their services are terminated. Keep the 6 men from our own staff, and they will take care of the business of wheeling this cage to the town. It may take 4 days, if drawn by bullocks.
All along the way crowds will watch and follow. That will be an excellent advertisement for our circus. My master, later in my life, has mentioned hell, describing the conditions that would give one a feel of it. Now, recollecting the day of my trapping and the journey onward, I realize its meaning. The trap was narrow and I felt cribbed and cramped.
I, who had lived a full and free life, stretching myself as I pleased, or burying myself in the jungle grass, now had to keep standing as the trap on wheels was drawn along. A pair of bullocks was yoked to it and the driver kept yelling and whipping them. The wheels rolled on rough ground, and I was jolted from side to side. I felt strangely uncomfortable to be moving without the use of my legs. First time experiencing locomotion.
They had screened the trap with a lot of foliage, so that I might not see the bullocks or the driver. They had some irrational fear that if I saw them, I might want to eat them up. They forgot that the goat which was the bait was still in my company, although not alive. Through many villages and towns they took me. My captors walked along behind the cage.
Now and then they stopped under a wayside tree and unyoked the bullocks to give them rest. At such times the front portion of the carriage rested on the ground, and the floor sloped forward and I kept sliding down, with the remains of the goat flowing over me. It was uncomfortable, and I had to roar out my displeasure.
The noise I made scared the spectators surrounding my cage and sent them running. My guards broke into laughter and shouted at the crowd, if you are so scared of the tiger locked up in the cage, what'll you do if we open the door and let it out? This was their way of joking. And then much talk, inevitable wherever human beings are gathered.
For one used to the grand silence of the jungle, the noisy nature of humanity was distressing. In due course, I got used to it. When I imbibed my master's lessons, I realized that deep within I was not different from human beings, and I got into their habit myself and never had a moment's silence or stillness of mind. I was either talking, in my own way, inaudibly, or listening, and thus became fully qualified to enter human society. After days, how many I didn't know and could not reckon, we came to a stop.
The sides of the cage were still screened with brambles and foliage and I had no idea where we were. I only heard, as usual, a lot of talk and shouting and counter-shouting, and much movement outside. Suddenly all the twigs and foliage screening the cage were torn away and I saw through the bars a new world such as I could never have imagined in my life, a stretch of land with no trees or rocks or long grass or bamboo clusters or lantana bushes or other undergrowth.
But bare and clean ground as far as I could see, ending in what I learnt was a big tent surrounded by smaller tents and shacks, the whole ground swarming with bipeds. I had no notion that the earth contained so many human creatures. Naturally, they stared and gaped and talked.
I tried to head my way out by pushing, and hurt myself in the attempt. Now I saw a man with a long staff in hand standing close by, saying, "Want to get out? All right, come on," and he poked with the staff and laughed when I protested. Ah, what a beautiful voice.
If you were a singer, you could enchant an audience of thousands without a mic, and laughed at his own joke. Others laughed with him too. I learned later that they were obliged to laugh at his jokes, being his subordinates.
As I went along, I learned that he was the owner of the circus. He was the one who met me when I was trapped, and he was to be my commander for years to come. He now poked the staff through the bars and was greatly amused when I jumped about in pain and confusion.
He said with a guffaw, "Ah, you are a promising dancer too." He turned to his assistant and said, "Let us advertise a tiger Bharatnatyam, something that no circus has ever attempted." "Yes, sir, that's an excellent idea, sir," said Captain's yes man, who was always by his side agreeing with everything he said, his second in command. "We will teach this fellow every accomplishment in due course," said Captain. "But our immediate job is to drive him into the other cage, which is going to be his new home." He prodded me with his staff and hit me to the accompaniment of stentorian commands. I was to hear the voice again and again in the years to come.
Also he drew the staff along the cage's bars, creating a rat-tat noise which confused me. When I tried to understand what it meant, he withdrew the staff and jabbed my side with it. I was miserable and did not know where to keep myself.
He gave me no rest, but drove me round and round with that staff in the narrow space till in sheer desperation, edging away from the probing stick, one dashed on and found myself in another cage, where the door immediately came down. This was my first act of obedience. Captain now withdrew his staff and said, "Ah, good.
Stay there," he said to his yes man. "Take the other cage for cleaning. Awful mess, stinks to the high heavens." As night fell, I could see more clearly. I heard a lion roar, and the voices of other jungle fellows, and over all that, of course, human talk in different keys. I saw only empty grounds before me and a glow of light somewhere.
I was bewildered and did not know why I was brought here, or what they were planning to do with me. Captain and his yes man would come off and on, stand looking at me, say something between themselves, and then leave. It was irksome to stay in that cramped space all day and night, my only activity being lying down and getting up, and again lying down and getting up, stretching myself to the extent possible, and turning round and round, grumbling and whining.
But no one cared. Being used to the vastness and freedom of jungle life, I found this an impossible condition of living. I could do nothing more than pace up and down in despair.
For 3 days I did not feel hungry. On the 4th day I felt a stab of hunger and did not know what to do about it. How was my hunger going to be appeased? This was hell, as defined by my master, an endless state of torment with no promise of relief or escape. I still had no conception that food could come one's way without a chase.
These were the stages of knowing attained through suffering. I can hardly describe that kind of suffering, an emptiness, a helplessness, and a hopelessness behind the bars. Now, of course, I have got used to it, after years of circus life and then the zoo.
But at that time I just had no conception of that kind of life. Bars of iron, unbending and perpetually pressing against one's face. I had had no contact with any sort of metal in my life. Now this combination of man and metal subdued me. Metal which in various forms served the evil ends of man as prison bars, traps, and weapons.
I desperately tried to smash the bars again and again and only made my head bloody. When Captain viewed me in this state, he only laughed and remarked to his aide, "All these stupid creatures are alike. They all expect the bars of the cage to be made of butter. No harm if he learns the facts of life in his own way." And they left me alone.
I began to despair when they left. When Captain showed himself outside my cage, a hope always rose in me, however slight, that some improvement was likely in my lot. That was probably the way he worked, driving me on to look on him ultimately as my savior.
He was considered to be an expert in animal training and deeply versed in their psychology. I began to look forward to his company. Pacing around that cage, I'd pause to press my nose close to the bars to watch the direction of his coming.
He'd look at me and ask, "How are you, sir?" Learn to be a good boy and I'll make you happy. I had no idea how to become a good boy and attain happiness. He continued to make me suffer loneliness, immobility, and above all hunger. For the last, I was hoping that he'd let me out now and then to hunt for food.
He didn't seem to think that way. Later, when I explained this stage of my life to my master, he said, "You probably in a previous life enjoyed putting your fellow beings behind bars." One has to face the reaction of every act, if not in the same life, at least in another life or series of lives.
There can be no escape from it. Now you have a chance to realize how your prisoners must have felt in those days, when you locked them in and watched them day by day to measure how far you had succeeded in breaking their spirits. Why should I have done that? I can't answer it. People only follow their inclinations, and sooner or later find their reward or retribution. That's the natural law of life, as inevitable as the ripening of a mango in its season or the fall of a withered leaf. For days they kept me without food and water.
Only Captain with his companion would come to observe me, and then comment, and leave. I lost all my strength and could hardly stand up, much less pace around my cage. Even that little movement was lost. I might be a carcass for all it mattered.
In this state my cage was moved one day and the door opened. I was let into a larger enclosure. I jumped out gratefully, but I found that my legs could not support me.
But Captain was there at the center of the enclosure and would not let me lie down. He was uttering a command in a voice which could be audible in the next jungle. He held a long whip in one hand and a chair in the other.
He lashed my face several times. My face smarted. I had never experienced such pain before.
When I tried to ward off his attack, he wielded the chair as a shield. With my paws I could only hit the chair, and he constantly poked my face with it. He commanded, "Run, run," and kept repeating it with every lashing.
To my shame and dismay, this was being watched by other animals, beyond the enclosure. First time I was setting eyes on those odd, unfamiliar creatures. I could not understand what species they belonged to.
Some of them were tethered to a post, some were free, some in different types of cages. Among the birds I could recognize a parrot, but not some of the long-legged ones. A grotesque one was the camel.
I was aghast at its height and humps. A majestic animal, to my surprise a grass-eater, I was told was a horse. There were many of them. A meaner version of the horse, not so handsome either, was also there, a donkey. Another one that took my breath away was a hippopotamus, which I mistook for a piece of ill-shaped mountain.
Of course I could recognize the ape, which moved about freely, shaggy one with awkward swinging arms, which seemed to be well integrated in human society, able to move with humans on equal terms. I had a glimpse of a bear, but no deer, which did not seem to have come to the notice of Captain. So far so good for them. Only cursed creatures, weighed down with the karma of their previous lives, seemed to have come to his notice, who wielded his chair and whip like a maniac.
I now understand that he had held me up as a lesson to other creatures, of what awaited them if they did not obey. At least they were fortunate in knowing how to show their obedience. They were all excellent performers. I was to become a colleague of theirs.
I was ignorant, bewildered, and in pain. It'd have been a relief to be able to pounce on that man and leave it to chance for one of us to survive. But that chair which he held made it impossible for me to approach him, while his whip could reach me all over.
He was crying out like a frenzied creature, "Run, run, come on." While I stood paralyzed and in great suffering, I heard one of those watching animals suggest to me in our language, which no tyrant could suspect or suppress, as it would sound like merely a grunt or a sigh, "He wants you to run round and round as if stung by bees at your backside. Do it and he will stop beating you. Otherwise you have no chance." I couldn't guess where the message came from. Could be the elephant placidly munching sugar cane, giving no suspicion of ever noticing my predicament, except through a corner of his eye.
Ah, that was a great help. I said to my well-wisher, "But I feel faint, can't stand on my feet, starving, not even a drink of water." "Never mind. You will get everything, only run round as he commands."
He is a madcap and we must learn to live with him. We are in his hands. Why do you tolerate him? Any one of us can stamp him out. Not so easily. He is really stronger than 10 of us. Once all of us tried and were sorry for it. Mutual communication was one privilege left for us animals. Human beings could not interfere with our freedom of speech because they never suspect that we have our own codes, signals, and idioms.
Fortunately, they usually did not notice when we grunted, hissed or sighed, but when they did, they would talk among themselves anxiously. Poor thing is making peculiar noises, I hope it is not going to be sick. Must tell the veterinarian to look over the beast, it must be in perfect form for the show tomorrow, for the specially advertised item, otherwise the public will smash the chairs and the gallery. The ape was the most light-hearted of all. He was the happiest animal in the circus, walking about freely in human company, fondly clinging to the finger of one or the other, even holding hands with Captain sometimes.
He must be conceited, fancying himself to be a human being, smoking cigarettes, sitting in chairs and drinking tea from cups, wearing trousers and coat and cap and spectacles, and chattering merrily all the time. His acts in the ring were not different from what he did outside the ring, except a cycle ride combined with trapeze acts. He continuously chatted, grinned and grimaced, a happy soul.
In my first glimpse of him, he also added a word of his own, "Hey tiger, run round and round as our boss demands." Let us hope and pray we'll see the day when he'll do the running and we shall hold the whip. Anyway, till that good day arrives, obey him and that simpleton will protect and feed us. We are at least spared the trouble of seeking food and preserving ourselves from enemies.
He is doing all that for us. He is a damned fool, but doesn't know it, thinks that he is the Lord of the universe. At one time, I had also thought so of myself, I said. I ran round and round in circles in pursuit of nothing, and that seemed a very foolish, senseless act.
At least a hare running ahead would have provided a show of reason for running. But that's how Captain seemed to want it. I held my breath, and though my eyes were darkening with faintness, I ran and kept running as long as he kept the whip cracking in the air without touching my back, and that was some improvement indeed. He went gyrating round and round following my movement.
It seemed as much hard work for him as for me. When the cracking of his whip ceased, I too stopped. It was not possible to run any more.
I was ready to fall into a faint and probably breathe my last, breath coming and going so fast. When I came near my cage, I found the door open and leaped in and lay down, expecting to be killed outright for my disobedience. But when I opened my eyes, I saw Captain outside looking at me more kindly than ever.
Well, that was a fine performance. I now have confidence that we can use him. The whip and the chair were put away and he was unarmed, and that itself seemed to me a good sign. My cage was wheeled away to its original place, away from other animals.
I was sorry because I felt better watching others and being in communion with them. Just as I was closing my eyes, some boarders called and prodded me to move to another cage. I was happy to find there pieces of meat and a trough of water.
My first piece of education. I understood the business now and the routine to be followed. Every day at the same hour they would drive me into a wheeled cage and draw it to the larger enclosure and let me out, where Captain waited with chair and whip.